Hello and welcome, stargazers, to another episode of the Outlaw Astrology podcast. Brief housekeeping. There is a newsletter called the Daily Stargazer, and there are free and paid versions. The link will be in the show notes. You can also find me and Outlaw Astrology on Instagram at The Outlaw Astrology. You can also find me on YouTube at Outlaw Astrology. And you can also find me on Pinterest also at Outlaw Astrology. Those links to those profiles will be in the show notes. And to help others find us, please feel free. We would appreciate it if you would review, give us 5 stars, the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, in particular Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc., so that others can find us as well. And thank you very much for that in advance. And now onward today, your intrepid star guide APM, that's me. We're continuing our archetypal journey through the zodiac by exploring Libra, the diplomat, the peacemaker, the harmonizer, the bridge builder. And as we move from discerning Virgo's meticulous healing, we move into Libra's realm of balance and harmony. And we'll discover how this cardinal air sign represents the crucial turning point in the hero's journey, the moment when the self must learn to dance with the energy of the other. And welcome back. We're starting with the scales of cosmic balance, and that is what Libra stands for. Libra is the only inanimate symbol in the zodiac. It's a set of scales that weighs and measures with precision. This air sign is ruled by Venus, and some of you might also use Eris, which is a dwarf planet in the Kuiper belt, which is where Pluto and other objects of similar size and denomination happen to be located. And Venus, though, invites us to consider relationship as the mirror for which we truly come to know ourselves. Unlike Leo's self-expression or Virgo's self-improvement, Libra represents the first true movement beyond the self. Why? Because the first 6 signs of the zodiac are personal in nature. It's about establishing who you are, the strength, the rootedness, the empowerment in who you are before you can reach out your hand to other people. And so with Libra, we enter the 7th sign of the zodiac, and it's the realm of partnership, connection, balance, bridge building, peacemaking, and compromisation, etc., negotiation, diplomacy, tact, etc. So the diplomat archetype teaches us about the true equilibrium isn't static, it's dynamic. It is a constant recalibration rather than a fixed state. Now, considering all of this energy, it is always a matter of recalibration rather than a fixed state. There is very little in this world that is either fixed or absolute. And if it is fixed and absolute, it is only that way for a very small, comparatively small period of time, and for a rather short length. So its duration will be rather short as well, because the commonality here is that change is the only constant in this cosmos, in this particular universe. And so when in this hero's journey, Libra represents the phase where the protagonist, that would be us, must learn to negotiate with others. So finding strength not in isolation, but in alliance with others and alignment with others. And this is where the hero, that would be also us, comparatively speaking, discovers that certain challenges can only be overcome through partnership. Now, here's the thing about this series. It is applying the astrological lens to the hero's journey, which is the archetypal journey, theoretically, that we are walking through our lives with and as. This is based on Joseph Campbell's work, I believe was called Hero with of a Thousand Faces, or With a Thousand Faces. I watched the documentary once, it was extraordinary. And so that's where this idea comes, also based on Jungian depth psychology and archetypes and archetypal energy. So this is where my astrology happens to be lying at this particular point in time. So when we're looking at myth, we're looking at the Greek Titans of divine law, and that the Titans were the gods that predate the Greek pantheon with Zeus, Hera, etc., that we understand and were taught if we went to, we went to a rather good school or a school that particularly focused on that. You would have learnt about mythology, Greek mythology in particular. Although world mythology is brilliant. So showing how wisdom and clear judgment would be wise, a wise guide in our search for balance, in addition to meaning, rather than people-pleasing or avoidance of conflict. And so we're talking about Themis, and that's where the scales come from. Now you might also, if you consider the scales, you might also think about Libra as the scales. The reason why Libra is represented by scales, particularly in the northern hemisphere, is because on that time when Libra season appears, that would be the autumnal equinox, the day and the light are more equally balanced. Whereas with the solstices, the summer, the light is longer. In the winter solstice, the darkness longer. In spring, we are moving into light from the darkness. So at this point, darkness and light, day and night, are of equal, almost equal time. And so that's why Libra is represented by the scales. But on a deeper level, we also think about the tarot card, the Justice card, which represents, usually sometimes will be represented only by a set of scales, which is the ability to measure, to negotiate, etc. Learning how to build bridges rather than rip them down. And so Themis represents that justice. Now, another goddess that represents that same justice would be Ma'at, from the Egyptian pantheon, of which the Greek pantheon owes a great debt, because a lot of the gods, when the Greeks met up with the Egyptians, by the way, a lot of those gods they matriculated their way back to Greece. People had a tendency when they traveled, they meet other cultures and then take those same stories back to their own cultures and alter them to make sense to the culture of which they were born, grew up in, etc. And so Ma'at is also about the scales. And that story goes as follows. Ma'at would meet someone in the afterlife and would measure their heart against a white feather. If the feather was heavier, they moved on to the more pleasant aspects of the afterlife. If, in fact, their heart was heavier than the feather, well then, either they were going to the more worse aspects, or they were going back to Earth to have another go again. They're going to have another go again to see if we can get this done correctly, whatever correctly might have been for the Egyptians. And a note, ancient Egyptians is problematic because they were Kamut or Kemet, and they would not have called themselves ancient Egyptians, so they were called Kemetans or Kamutans, depending on what lineage we are discussing. So those are the two justice type archetypes. And so when we're looking at Libra energy, we have to weigh what is best for us as well as what's best for other people. You'll notice that I did not do a black and white there, because black and white is something that once we get to the seventh sign of the zodiac, you start to explore more. That black and white thinking can be stifling and misses a great deal of the nuance of the picture. So Libra energy is learning how to see past a binary, to see past certain biases, and that is being open to other people's opinion and other perspectives. And so having a balance between between us and others. And it's meant to go beyond people-pleasing. And when I say people-pleasing, I mean it in the most toxic way, meaning that others' desires, needs, whatever, is tended to first at the expense of the self, rather than doing things because we want to help others or be kind, because that's not people-pleasing, that's connecting, that's sharing, that's helping. People-pleasing is what when I say it here, it always refers to the toxic version of it in which we self-betray and self-abandon, self-avoid, and self-repress and oppress. That's what we're talking about here. And so that is usually done to avoid conflict. And here's the thing. Libra energy exists at that tension between the avoidance of conflict and going along just to go along. And so that is a very real tension for Libra energy. Now, if we're looking at the shadow of harmony, there's also something called false harmony, meaning we do the people-pleasing thing in the belief that if we make others happy, that they will, one, return the favor, and two, our inner sense of equilibrium will be restored, which, since this is a complicated world and a highly imperfect one, rarely works out as we hope, which leads us to the shadow of the false harmony. And so the Libran shadow emerges when we mistake peace for harmony and sacrifice our authenticity for approval. So in our culture, and by that I mean Western culture, it is a culture that values politeness over truth, appearances and respectability over authenticity. And so Libra's challenge is to recognize the genuine balance between honoring all perspectives, including our own truth, not excluding. It's not an either or. We don't need to hang on others' truth and ignore our own. We consider both. So we temper our other people's perspectives with our own, and we temper our own with other people's perspectives. And so the peacemaker, the diplomat shadow manifests as indecision, people-pleasing, the tendency to intellectualize one's feelings and emotions rather than actually fully experiencing them. So we are exploring the avoidance of necessary conflict and how that can create greater imbalance rather than facing it directly. So this is the hero who cannot say no or stand in their truth, and ultimately cannot form genuine partnerships. Now, why is that? Because people are going to believe the story of us that we tell. And so they're going to think that this fully polished, wonderful self that we presented them with is accurate. They have no reason to question it. And so they're going to respond accordingly. And since this self is whom we made up to people please, to win approval, to get people to like us, they're responding to an inauthentic expression of ourselves, and therefore they're not going to get it right. They're going to make choices based on what they think we want, which will be wrong because they don't have the best information. And that's what I mean by the shadow part of this, is that when we people please, we make it harder for our own needs and desires to be expressed, to be met, to be satiated, etc. And so that's what I mean by you can't stand, if you can't stand in your truth, you cannot form genuine partnerships. Now, here is where Eris comes into the story. Because Eris's energy is all about standing in your truth. And it comes from that myth, from ancient Greece, which eventually was turned into a fairy tale. The fairy tale is the 13th fairy who was uninvited to Sleeping Beauty's, birth party, and all the fairies queued up to give her a blessing. And this fairy turns up as well to give her a curse. You might also see that trope in Ella Enchanted, the book and the film, in which the 13th fairy makes Ella just very, what is the word I would use? Extremely obedient and agreeable, even when it was not in her best interest to be so. She had no choice. And so her story, in that regard, and pop culture regard, is about her chasing down that fairy to get this overly agreeable, people-pleasing nature part of her cast off so she can act of her own agency and free will. the Eris myth goes back to ancient Greece, which probably might even go back even further than that. And this story, pretty similar to the two I've already shared, is the goddess Eris, goddess of justice and retribution, who is also aligned with Ares and Nemesis, in that lovely coterie of dark gods that the other gods really didn't care much for. And Eris is the goddess who turned up at the party uninvited. It was a wedding of dubious nature with people who probably shouldn't have been trying to get together to begin with, and throws the golden apple in that says to the fairest, thence starting a war between three goddesses, and then the Trojan War that followed after that. So this is how that energy can go sideways. Now, Eris in Libra is at home, meaning in domicile. It is the ruling sign of Eris, which is now a new outer planet introduced into the pantheon that we now call astrology. And it is standing in that uncomfortable space where you have to say no. Because we live in a culture where saying yes is the way of things. It's like, absolutely, yes, I can help you do this thing that in 2 weeks I'm not sure I can help you with, but yes, as opposed to no, and protecting our energy, I cannot help you with that because I do not know what I'm going to be doing in 2 weeks, etc. So that's the Eris energy, that is standing in your truth so that you can form genuine partnerships. That's what Eris teaches. So that is Eris's energy and Libra. Now, as I mentioned, we've got Ma'at, and that's the Egyptian goddess whose feather weighted against the heart in judgment. And that teaches that harmony is not just an external state, it's also an internal commitment to truth. So Ma'at is weighing how committed to truth were those who stood before her. How committed to truth are we, is what we must ask ourselves with Libra energy. And how committed are we? Are we so committed to it that we're willing to say no and withstand other people when they insist that no be turned into a yes? Can we stand in that tension? Can we question our need to go along just to get along? Because that is what Libra teaches. And let's step into embodying that divine diplomat, or sacred diplomat if you prefer. So if we want to evolve beyond the Libran shadow, we must understand that true diplomacy isn't avoiding tension, but skillfully working with it. So there is the god Tyr. That's a Norse god who sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir, who happened to be a child of Loki, the god Loki. And sometimes maintaining cosmic order requires personal sacrifice or cost. So when I say sacrifice here, and please excuse me if you hear a whooshing sound, we are having a little bit of a heat wave where I happen to be, and the fan is on and very cooling, but sometimes I have to tilt it towards me, so you're going to hear a little whir in the background, and that's just me trying to stay cool. Anyway, cosmic order requires personal cost. When I say sacrifice, I mean the personal cost that it's going to take, because sometimes standing in our truth means that we have to sacrifice other people's immediate approval, that we have to sacrifice that dopamine hit we get when we say yes and other people pat us on the back and say, great, thanks, sort of vibe. And it's also the courage to face difficult truths. And sometimes that difficult truth is that we're not as committed to truth or standing in authenticity as we would like to believe. Now, consider this. That is a flowy fluid thing. We don't stand in truth all the time. You have to reinforce that commitment on the daily. So most days is what we're looking at. We're not looking at perfection. We don't do perfection here at Outlaw Astrology at all. It is most days have you stayed committed to truth. Most days have you stayed committed to being authentic and standing in your authenticity and giving people. When I say authentic self-expression, it means saying that in the most appropriate way and time, your true feelings or what you really mean. And I understand socially it's not always easy or always the most appropriate to share feelings. Sometimes we choose to silence those feelings or not share them because the people that should be shared with or could be shared with are not the kind of people we actually want to form connections with. Sharing yourself authentically is building a bridge and a connection that you can nurture into a real relationship, a real connection. And so we're looking at the mature diplomat that recognizes that opposition creates clarity and that contrast is necessary for beauty, but also living. So in connections, in collaborations, any relationships, generally and broadly speaking, this means cultivating the ability to stand in our sovereignty whilst creating space for others to do the same. So Libra at its highest expression teaches us that balance isn't compromise, it's integration, okay? Which is why you hear me trying to avoid, and if you haven't heard me, I'm trying to avoid the word compromise as much as possible when I mean integration. So finding the third way that honors seemingly opposing or disparate truths or experiences, point of views, etc. And so this last one, we're looking at Ishtar. And this goddess embodies the delicate balance between opposing forces, demonstrating that harmony isn't the absence of conflict, but its proper integration. So one of the challenges that Libra has is that conflict, because we're all human beings with nervous systems, conflict isn't always comfortable. Questioning looks like challenging, looks like doubting, which gets pushed back all the time because most of us are thinking to ourselves, this matters to me. Why are you questioning it? As if, their doubts are somehow a comment on our own personal failings or what have you, when sometimes it's just a lack of understanding. So harmony doesn't have to be the absence of conflict. It could simply be learning how to integrate opposites. Since within ourselves, everybody has a Libra in their chart. And within ourselves, there are opposites. There are opposing desires, needs, parts of our personalities that don't play so nicely together because they have different points of view. And so the whole point of Libra energy, what Libra energy teaches, is learning to stand in that conflict, learning to see the opposing sides of ourselves or conversations, which leads to one last thing. Something Libra is known for is playing the devil's advocate. The devil's advocate is basically being able to see both sides of a situation and then to ask questions of both sides. Now, here's the challenge here. This is integration energy, but it can go very, very wildly afield when people misunderstand the questions and see it as, one, taking sides, or two, playing both sides off against each other. And let's just be clear and fair. Human beings do that. Sometimes people are bored and they have nothing else better to do with their time, and some people enjoy drama and causing challenge. Now, if for this extreme energy, I'm thinking in particular when Pluto was in Libra, which would be back in the late 70s. And so there are a lot of people with this placement in their chart and this type of energy learning to sit with opposites and to build bridges between the two opposites rather than bouncing back and forth or, being polarizing, because Pluto energy can be polarizing. And so when we're looking at this type of energy, Libra energy, what we're looking at is learning to sit with, to be sat with, bridge building through conflict. So our conflict within ourselves, being able to breathe through it, to be mindful that just because we have conflict within us does not say anything about personal failing. It is merely a fact. It is temporary. It is something we're going through. It will pass. It will flow forward as all time appears to do. It doesn't have to say anything about us. It's just an opportunity to pause, to reflect, to contemplate how we can work with opposites, how we can integrate two opposites without actually feeling the need to constantly be polarizing within ourselves and externally within our relationships and connections with others. And I think this is a good stopping point. So, last thoughts. As we conclude our exploration of Libra, it is wise to consider that the scales teach us to find equilibrium not by becoming immovable, but by remaining responsive, receptive. And the key to embodying the diplomat or the peacekeeping energy lies not in avoiding difficult conversations or experiences, but by approaching them with grace, integrity, and a genuine desire for mutual understanding. So in our own journeys this week, a good idea would be to notice where we might be sacrificing our truth for harmony, where we might be clinging too rigidly to our position without considering other perspectives. I said consider, I did not say adopt or adapt. And the diplomat's wisdom lies in recognizing that true balance emerges when we honor both self and other in equal measure. And by that I mean as equal as you can make it, and if it tends to be 60-40, fine, or 55-30, 55-45, also fine. And we're not looking for perfection here, we are looking for most days kind of energy. And so if you found value in today's episode, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from Libra's wisdom. Until next time, when we descend into the transformative depths of Scorpio, may your relationships reflect the beauty of authentic balance, peace, and astro magic star people.